Fernando?
Today, we're going to talk about defining happiness and some of the major myths people have about happiness.
Okay, so we are going to dig a bit into what is happiness, what is not, what can bring happiness, and so on, I guess.
Yes, correct.
Um,
So I find that a good way to begin this conversation is by
yeah.
trying to define what happiness is not.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we did as well during
Mhm.
our
Yeah.
event. Yeah, maybe we want to quick tell the people, to tell the listeners, actually how we met and a little bit about us before starting. What do you think?
Yes, I'm interested in learning Italian at this moment. I'm originally from Colombia. I've been living in the United States for 25 years. I'm a professor of psychology here. But during the pandemic, I decided to take the opportunity of having extra time to learn a new skill. And I chose Italian for many reasons. And in the process of learning Italian, I met Simone, who's a polyglot. Can you describe a little bit about your
Trying to be.
background in terms of languages?
Yeah, well, as Fernando says, I love languages. I think, yeah, languages are all my life. I'm completely always surrounded by everything that has to do with languages. Professionally, I work as a project manager, and well, yeah, we met with Fernando on an event online that I used to organize, well, that I still organize. And we decided to start this project together because on my side, I started to get to know more about what is psychology, positive psychology, and so on. So this project was really interesting, and here we are.
We also noticed that we have something in common, not just between the two of us, but with the people that participate in those language events. And we suspect that with you, the listener, it seems that people who are willing to um, invest time in their own development, people that are always looking to learn new things, um, that we have that in common. We like to grow, we like to develop. And that's what this space is for us to have an opportunity to continue growing ourselves, but also to share that experience with a global community of people that have similar interests.
Yeah, exactly. So we like to grow, we like to learn something new every day. And if you also like to learn something new, you are probably in the right place listening to this podcast. If you don't like to learn anything new, maybe you are not. I'm joking. So, welcome. This is the very, 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 very first episode of this new podcast series. How many podcasts are we gonna make, Fernando? We don't know yet, right?
Sky's the limit.
Sky is the limit. Yes, I like the attitude here.
Uh, One thing I like to tell people, Simone, is that we don't want to come across as the experts. Instead, this is a conversation. And what we're going to share with you today is not what Simone and I came up with our wonderful, insightful brains. Instead, some of the wisdom that we're going to share with you is feedback that we got from one of our language events, where we have
Yeah,
been meeting with people from, um,
many different countries, I would say, all over the
yes,
world, right?
France, Japan, the United States, England, just to name a few of the countries that have been represented so far.
Yeah, exactly. So we were really curious about getting to know more about how people worldwide see the concept of happiness and a bunch of other concepts related to happiness and psychology. because I think that there is a very strong cultural component in all these ideas, right?
Yes, and we also know that there's a lot of research out there in terms of how scientists and academics define happiness. And we're going to bring some of that to you as well. But we also want to make sure that we reflect the experiences of a global community. And so this podcast conveys both what science has to say about some of these topics, but more importantly, what the real life experience is for people. And we want to capture a little bit of that wisdom that can be um, derived from conversations with a global community.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to put together feedback we got from people, I wouldn't say out on the streets, but out on the internet in this case, and what science says, right? And we're going to, well, compare it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to see one side and the other. Yeah.
This is wisdom that is coming from the Zoom universe.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
All right. So one of the first ideas that came up in our discussion with our community was that it was very, very difficult to define what happiness is. And we seem to agree that there is no one definition.
Yeah,
And
it's
that if
hard to tell.
somebody, yes, and that if somebody tells you that they know exactly what happiness is, they probably either don't know what they're talking about or they're trying to sell you a bill of goods, right?
Yeah, maybe
Something
they
that
drank too
is
much.
something that
That's
is
another
too
option, right?
yes, something that is too good to be true.
Yeah. That's really what we found out also by talking with so many people about what happiness is. We actually decided that probably a better way to tackle the subject is to start defining what happiness is not, right?
Yes, and people did actually have a lot to contribute in terms of defining what happiness is not. But we kind of like sum up that using a little bit of insight from secular Buddhism, where they define the opposite of happiness being suffering. So suffering seems to definitely be the opposite of what people call happiness.
Mm-hmm.
But suffering in this tradition is not defined, it is actually defined as, um, let me say that again.
Mm-hmm.
So suffering is defined as ignorance. Now, ignorance in this tradition is not lack of knowledge, ignorance is lack of awareness. So, therefore, we can say that we are not happy when we lack awareness about our own humanity and we just live lives in a mindless way. So that's a good place to begin.
Right.
Now,
This means that if I'm just going through my life without actually knowing what's going on, without being aware of it, then I'm probably not happy, right?
yes, and I don't remember who said the exact word, but it might be Chilia from Paris, who said, "Oh, like being on an autopilot." Remember? So
Yeah,
the word
yeah.
autopilot came from multiple perspectives, and that is very true because what neuroscience indicates now is that it seems like uh, during our awake time during the day, it seems like human beings spend about 50% of the time on automatic mode,
Mm-hmm.
just going with emotions, going back and forth, stuck in traffic, or like just thinking and thinking about life, but without necessarily having a good sense of awareness of what we're doing. And that's actually a state of your psychology where you're actually mindless. it's funny because it's kind of like a contradiction. When your mind is running the show and you're not aware, you're acting mindless. It sounds like a contradiction, right?
Yeah, it sounds like a contradiction. I guess I mean, it evolved and it depends on our biological, let's say, development as human beings, right? I mean, having this autopilot kind of helps us also not to take decisions sometimes.
Yes, exactly. Because we actually are, we consume a lot of energy. And the organ that consumes the most energy in our bodies is the brain. No surprise. So, yes, the brain is built to automatize. And the more we automatize, the better. So, let's say, for example, I love to play tennis. When you go out to learn the tennis serve for the first time, you're doing a lot of additional movement. But the better you go, the more you clean up and the more you automatize and the more efficient you become. So the brain uses that same strategy for many things. But when we just automatize relationships, for example, and when we just automatize responses, sometimes we can react in ways that are not fair to people. And a good example of that is a stereotype when we're
Yeah,
biased, for example.
yeah.
So
I think it just came to my mind. For example, a couple of months ago, I took the challenge. I didn't drink coffee for a whole month, right?
right.
And I found myself going to the train station because usually I commute every day to work. Going to the train station and going directly to the bar to get a coffee. And I mean, I think this is a clear example of some automatic behavior that I didn't even realize that I was doing every day anymore, right? And
Yes.
that was a way for me to, stop a sec and notice, oh, okay, do I really need this? Do I really want a coffee every day? And so on and so forth. Yeah. This is maybe a stupid example, but I think it gives an idea about
Oh, it's perfect.
what we want to say.
Because it just saves your brain so much energy to automatize. So the brain loves prototypes, for example. So if I'm telling you a joke, and in the joke I mention fruit, I can continue with my joke. I don't need to tell you exactly which fruit I'm talking about, because immediately your brain will give you a banana, right? Or an orange or an apple. Usually those are the top three for most people.
I had an
So if I
apple
say
in
fruit, oh, perfect. So, but if somebody's listening to us in South America, for example, they may picture a guava, guajava, right? If
Yeah,
somebody listens to us in Hawaii, more likely a pineapple, so on and so forth.
correct.
So you use your own culture to like throw the specific prototype that your brain needs so you can continue communicating. But sometimes we engage in fights with people because the person said fruit, we imagine a banana, but they meant an orange, and then there's disagreement, and we are like, right?
Yeah. I know
And
something about it by working with international customers as a project manager. So
yes.
for some reason, I always have an apple in mind, and the customer has a banana. So that doesn't
Exactly.
make things easier. Yeah.
So it seems to be that that's a good place to begin defining happiness, because we know that when we are on automatic pilot, we're more likely to make errors,